So Hai's gonna talk for about 45 minutes, an hour or so, about whatever he wants to talk about, and then we'll have Q&A for about 20 to 30 minutes after that, and then we're going to do a little short critique with some of the students that are working in ZBrush and stuff like that. So basically, the first hour and a half will be open, and then the last chunk will be probably close it off a little bit just for the work. So, with that said, this is to do a warm round of applause for Hai. So, take it away.
All right, cool. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, so this is, as Andrew was saying, this is kind of a talk that I would have liked to have heard when I was a student. First of all, who am I? My name is Hai Phan. I'm currently a senior character art outsource supervisor, which is just a fancy way of saying that I help oversee a lot of the outsourcing that happens at Blizzard, specifically for Overwatch. Before that, I was a character artist on a few different games, including Overwatch. You can see if you're not familiar, you can see my work here on this website. And also, I have some videos here that I produced a few years ago now, but it'll be available for you all as well. And if anyone has any questions afterwards, you can reach me at this email address. I'm still one of the few people with a Hotmail address. Before we begin, I just want to, a disclaimer is that I'm not here to represent Blizzard. So anything that I say, any opinions that I share are purely my own. Everyone has to say that who comes to these kinds of things. Also, I didn't know how many people were going to be here, so I feel a little bit unprepared. Like this is not a fancy presentation. This is a default template. There's no pictures. It's all text, but hopefully it'll still be useful. And lastly, if you're not familiar with the videos, when you watch it, keep in mind that it was done 4 years ago, and also that I had no idea that I'd be presenting it in an academic scenario. So, you'll see what I mean when you see it. Okay. Okay. So, again, this is about the transitioning from student to professional. I think there's a lot of misconceptions that a lot of students have, what the working in the industry is really like, and hopefully this will help you get from one place to where you really want to be a little bit easier. There are two things that I want to say right before we begin is, and I don't want to start off on a negative note necessarily, but just to be perfectly honest, statistically, it's a very difficult thing to do, to get into an industry like film or games. There are just not a whole lot of jobs, but a whole lot of people wanting to get into it. But at the same time, there's no reason why you can't do it. If you put in the effort, put in the time, and set yourself up for success, you approach it the right way, I think anyone can do it. You don't have to have a whole lot of talent necessarily. Hard work is always going to beat talent. Of course, if you have talent and hard work, that's even better, but yeah. Okay, so to start with, I think that as you get ready to, prepare your portfolio, you want to go further, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you realize that everything is in your own hands. One of the number one complaints I hear online from students is that, oh, well, I don't go to a good school. I don't have good teachers. I don't have talent. And I think all of these things, while unfortunate, are, at the end of the day, they're still just excuses. Like, none of these things are things that you can't overcome, especially in this day and age with the internet. Like, you can Google anything, and I am still so surprised so many people coming to me asking how to do something that literally, you could just type it in and you'd find it in like the first 5 results. The next step is just to be honest with yourself. You take this moment to really assess where you are. How good are you? What is your skill level? And what is the skill level that you want to be at? I think that it gets a little bit tricky because there's a lot of people say that you shouldn't compare yourself to professional necessarily because it's unfair. You're just gonna, feel bad about yourself or whatever. But you still have to be honest. You have to look at your work at this place and time and realize the gap that you need to traverse in order to get to where you want to be. Just because you are getting good grades, just because you're completing your assignments and all of your fellow students love your work, at the end of the day, if it doesn't hold up to what the industry expects, it doesn't mean anything. And again, I feel like that sounds really bad, and I don't want to make it sound bad, but I just want to be totally realistic here. And I think that it's the first way to get about overcoming this or to get to where you want to be is to set very clear goals for yourself. I think a lot of people have very vague goals. It's like, oh, I want to be the best artist. I want to be rich. I want, all these things that everyone can say that, but no one, it's always, if you don't define it very clearly, like, or quantify it, then it'll always just be out of reach. It'll just be this dream that you'll never be able to attain. But if you set very clear goals for yourself, like, okay, I've created one model and it's not very good. What is my next goal? My next goal is to create a model that is better in this way, the specific way. Like, where is my weakness? Hair, I do crappy hair. Okay, well, maybe the next model, I do better hair. And as long as you have these small goals and you keep going step by step, then one day you'll look up and you'll find that you are exactly where you want to be. And that's this next point, exactly. You work, reassess where you are, and repeat. And there will be no mountain that will seem too high if you just take it step by step like that. And to be flexible, because you never know when, as a student right now, it's easy to say that, oh, I want to do this in the future, but as soon as you start down this path, you may realize that actually this other thing is more in line with what I want to do. For example, when I was in school, I was an animation major. My animation sucks, by the way, but I was an animation major. And at that time, I always wanted to do modeling, but I was afraid of it. I thought that, especially back then, this was a long time ago, it would seem very technically challenging. It's like, I'm not very good with computers. I don't know, I was just afraid of it. And so I thought that animation was easier, and it's not, but, and funny enough, now that I work in games, I actually see that animation can be a lot more technical, but that's for another time. Lastly, set yourself up for success. I think that there are, just looking back on my time in school and seeing other students around me, I felt like I was very lucky because for the most part, other than like summer jobs and stuff, like all I had to worry about was going to school, doing the best I could in my classes, and that's about it. And it's nice to have that kind of luxury to do that. So if you can afford it, I highly recommend you do something similar where if you feel like you're short on time, you have to make time. If that means not going to a party, if it means maybe not hang out with your friends as much as you used to. These are all sacrifices that you may have to make in order to set yourself up for success. Okay, a few things that I think you can do now is to make the best use of your time at school. I think that you are in a I think it's going to be hard to appreciate right now, but like looking back in the future, like everyone, I wish I was back in school. You know, it's like, it's such it's a time when you have so many doors open for you, so much opportunity just waiting to be explored. I think that especially in a school like this, where you have a lot of different disciplines that you can also look at, it's a very good use of your time, even though it doesn't seem like it, to explore as many options as you can, because I think there's kind of a misconception among game artists or artists in my field where we are only interested in the things that directly relate to what we want to do. Like, I only care about art for games. I only want to do computer art. I only want to do cool art. When there's actually a lot of much cooler things out here. There's like that sculpture garden. There's like the ceramic stuff. There's all sorts of things that, even though they don't directly relate to what you're doing, it's going to enrich your perception of the world, and that will all funnel back into your own art at the end of the day. There's one of the telltale signs I see of student work is I can see like they have a very limited exposure to what good art is, if that makes any sense. It's like it ends up being very generic, or it ends up being very unsophisticated, because I think they just haven't explored all of these other things. There's a link at the end, but I don't know if anyone here is familiar with an artist named Feng Zhu. He's a concept artist for movies and stuff like that. He has a very good video that I highly recommend everyone watch. It's called Developing Your Visual Library. I mean, he has a ton of awesome videos, but this is one of them. And it talks about kind of like going through life and the kind of visual library that you accumulate growing up, and and how it contributes to being a better artist. Let's see. The next thing is art. Foundation, history, and trends. You have to have a good art foundation. You have to do life drawing. You have to do different kinds of mediums, just to know what's out there and help you appreciate having undos, you know, in your 3D programs. Knowing art history, just so that you know that what came before, why art is the way it is today. It's super boring when you're a student, but like when you look back on it, everything will fall into place. Like, oh yes, okay, I understand now how abstract art, even though like I'm not a fan of it, like I can see that without abstract art, there would be no stylized art. There would be no liberties taken off of depicting something realistically. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of stuff that I think is worth looking into. Last thing is trends, and this is something that you're probably all already into. Like just knowing what is going on right now, knowing what is popular in games right now, knowing what is trendy or cool, and this is just purely because art is a very visual language, and in order to communicate that with your customers, you have to know what they like, and hopefully you like it too, and that reciprocates into a successful relationship. And related to that is just when you start putting together your portfolio, you want it to be appropriate for what you want to do. So if you are applying to Blizzard, for example, and we get this all the time, we get a lot of portfolios that are like super realistic characters that should be in like movies or something. And we're like, this is super impressive, this is awesome, but you know what? We cannot see how you would fit into Blizzard. You know, Blizzard is much more stylized art. It's much more game function over art. And just when we see a portfolio like that, it's very difficult for us to even imagine what kind of contributions you can make other than making us look bad if we were to have a sculpt off, you know, or something. So know your market. If you want to get in games, you should have game art in your portfolio. If you want to get in movies, you should have high-res models with all that fancy stuff in your portfolio. And if you want to cover all your bases and you want to do both, it's still worth trying to adjust your portfolio and customize it to wherever you are applying. The next thing is developing a professional attitude. I think that this is going to be a little bit tricky right now, just because you're still students. But get used to putting yourself in the shoes of a professional. For example, if I was in school and I got an assignment, I would try to treat it as a job. Okay, so like my client, my professor, whatever, gave me this task, and I want to approach this professionally. Professional means that I don't complain about it. I don't do a bad job on it just because I'm lazy or because I'm not interested. He's not paying me, but like, this is your job that you've been given, so you want to deliver, and you want to deliver on time. So again, no excuses, just do the best you can, and everything should fall into place. That's kind of what my definition of being professional is. And lastly, technical excellence. I put this at the bottom for a reason. This is not in order, but this is at the bottom for a reason. And there is some expectations for knowing the technical ins and outs of the field that you're trying to get into. A lot of that, it's still, the reason I put it on the bottom is that if your portfolio is really good, like if someone were to look at your portfolio and we could see that you are actually a very good artist and you could be trained, then we could teach you the technical stuff, not a big deal. Like, it's much harder to train someone how to have a good eye, how to be a professional, things like that. So, but at the same time, it is worth looking into and keeping up to date with. So, how good do you have to be? And the answer is very good. Especially these days, I think that if you go into, if you find yourself thinking that, oh well, I'm still a student, it doesn't matter. By the time you graduate and you still have that mentality, or you still haven't like really worked on your portfolio, then you're going to be in a real rough spot, at least for the first few years. And that there's just too many artists out there, too many good artists out there, not only in this classroom, but also all across the country, and then all around the world. There are like some amazing artists overseas in other countries as well. And they, and everyone has the same dream, right? And at the end of the day, like, no one really cares where you come from. It's just, can you contribute to whatever project that they're working on? At the same time, though, no one expects you to be perfect right out of school. Like that's unrealistic. But at least you should show the promise of being a professional. We should be able to see that you have done your homework. You've mastered as best you can on your own, and you can see the commitment. You can see the dedication and the potential. And I think that's a very important part of it too. It's just when you go in there and if someone can see that how you could contribute, even if it's not like doing the lead models in the next Uncharted or whatever, at least they can see that this person does have valuable skills, and the project will be better for us taking them on. And lastly, it's not just about your art skills, but also people skills. This kind of comes back again to your time here and being students. It starts with how you treat your fellow students, and then in the future, how you treat your fellow coworkers. You'll see that, especially once you get starting to work in a studio environment, you'll find that there's almost like a homogeneous kind of person that tends to work in this kind of job. And that's because, you know, we all had the same dreams growing up, we all saw the same movies, we played the same games, and not necessarily shared all the same values, but it's a much more homogeneous group than if you were to work at, like, I don't know, like a random store somewhere where you just have people from all walks of life going in there. And when you have that kind of concentration of people, it becomes even more important to be able to communicate with them. Because, I mean, you might think that, oh, it'd be easy because, like, you know, these people are kind of like me. But the thing that it becomes difficult is that everyone else is also an artist. Everyone else is also a very competitive, very skilled artist. And when it comes down to, like, okay, well, I think, you know, you want to give feedback or something, being able to navigate someone else's ego and also have them respect yours, you know, it's something that you can't really teach. It's just something that you have to kind of experience, and hopefully you're doing that right now, kind of getting your feet wet with that. When your professor gives you some harsh criticism, it's not because he hates your work necessarily, it's just that he's trying to help you, and that's the same thing with your fellow students as well, hopefully. And no one should be a jerk to anyone else out of spite. Okay, and let's say you go into production art. What makes a good production artist? And by production artist, I just mean someone who's contributing to a production like a game or a film or anything like that. The first thing is just to be useful. The kinds of jobs that are out there, there is no room for someone who is just filler. Everyone has to be able to contribute to the project in some way or form. And the best way to do that is probably to specialize. There is just too much to learn and too much to wrap your head around to be like a generalist these days. I mean, there are still generalist positions, of course, but as you go higher and higher end, it's just impossible. Like, you can't be the master animator, modeler, renderer, and all that. You just have to pick something that you feel that you are strong with, that you can contribute the most with, and run with it for a little bit and see how you like it. Another thing that a good production artist should have, I talked about this before, is just having very strong foundations and good sensibilities. And good sensibilities, what I mean by that is kind of what I meant by kind of maturing your taste in art a little bit. Again, I know that if you see my videos, you might not think that's the case at all, but it's really about, like, what do you can you appreciate what makes something beautiful or appealing? Can you replicate that same feeling to someone else? I think that the trap a lot of people fall into is like, okay, I was tasked to make some object, and then you make it exactly like that object, or as close to that object as you can, but then it's stiff. It doesn't have any real soul, and it doesn't really resonate with anyone. And like, there's a lot of things that really distinguish a good piece of art from something that is just, kind of mediocre or average. And being able to identify very clearly what makes a piece good is going to help you in so many ways, because like, these are things that no one is necessarily going to tell you how to do on the job. They expect you to know how to do it already, So again, develop those strong foundations in art now, as soon as possible, and then realize that it's also a lifelong journey. Art is, you're not going to master art. No one ever masters art, It's something that you just get good at progressively, hopefully. And as you get older, the better sensibilities you have, the better art you will be able to do. Then the next thing is have a passion for the production you want to be a part of. And I bring this up because I've met a few artists in the past who weren't really into it. For example, maybe there's a guy who really wanted to work in film, but then he's like, oh, well, I guess I'll settle for working in games. And then it shows, because like, he's not respecting what makes game art successful. His models are over budget, they're not performant, they don't follow the art style of the rest of the game. He just becomes difficult to work with because of this. He doesn't have this passion for the production that everyone else is trying to contribute to. And I'm sure that happens in reverse as well. And that goes into the next point, is just to take pride in doing a good job, no matter what it is. Like, one of the things I'm most proud of doing in Overwatch is actually these ramen bowls. I don't know if you, in Hanamura, like, it's like a full bowl of ramen, you shoot it, it explodes, they're half-eaten bowls, there's like an empty bowl with just like a little bit of broth at the bottom. Like, it's so cool. Like, that's, like, no matter what it is, like, even if it's an assignment at school, if it's not something that you're interested in, like let's say your professor tells you to model a keyboard or something very mundane and uninteresting, like, you should take it upon yourself to make it interesting to you. Make it the most beautiful keyboard that you've ever seen. Light it in the most romantic and awesome way. You're always able to plus it. Don't just do it and shove it out the door. Like, you should take pride in what you're doing. And the last thing that I think makes a good production artist is just the general mentality of, I am a production artist first, and then an artist second. This happens a lot in games. Like, I kind of gave you an example before where someone wasn't totally into the production and they wanted to put their art first. And I think that's going to be a tough thing for a lot of students to come to terms with, because up until this point, you're probably thinking that, I want to do art because I love art and I love the idea of bringing something of my own into this world, right? Like, everyone here can probably identify with that feeling. But when you work on like a game or a movie or something like that, you have to almost put that secondary. The art is no longer the asset that you're making or the character that you're making. The art is the production itself. The game itself is the art. The movie is the art. And you are just one of many pieces that go into making that the best art it can be. So when someone tells you that you're tasked with doing something, it's so easy to take offense to it almost and be like, oh, well, how come he gets to do this thing and I'm doing this thing? You'll get there. Everything will, if you prove yourself and you are dedicated enough to the project and and people can recognize that, then you'll get your chance. Don't worry about it. And what to expect as you go into your first jobs. Getting your first job will not be easy, but that's perfectly normal. When I graduated, I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, and when I graduated, it was kind of a dark time for me because I was working really hard in school, and then I came out of school and I'm like, now what? What am I doing? What am I going to do? And I kind of floundered a little bit. I just took the easy way out. I took a 3D modeling job for the military, like back in Virginia, which is where my parents were. And I lived at home with my parents. I lived at home with my parents, and on the side, I worked on my portfolio. And again, that's kind of what I meant before when I said set yourself up for success. If that means that moving back with your parents so that you can save some money and work on your portfolio, you should do that. Now is the time to set your pride aside and know what your bigger goal is and do what you can to work towards that. If that means, hey, if you look at yourself and you're like, you know what, I don't have any friends who are interested in art. I don't, why is that even a problem? You have all these classmates here, right? Like the Poly Squad, even, I'd never had anything like that as a student. So there's a lot of stuff here that these days I feel like would be easier. The only thing that's more difficult now is that there's a whole lot more people wanting to do it. So the competition is a lot more fierce. But I say that this first point because I don't want anyone to feel discouraged if you can't get a job right out of school, especially not your dream job, because the chances of that happening, the chances of someone coming out of school and walking into Blizzard as a production artist right away is very slim. I don't even want to guess at the statistics on that. But again, if you take things step by step, maybe you do military sim like I did. Maybe you work anywhere on the side just to support yourself, and then you go home and then you do your portfolio. Eventually, you're going to get there. It's just that most people give up. It's just there are going to be times when it just seems like I've been at it for a while now, and no one is responding to me. It's just very easy to get discouraged. I don't want those first few years or however long it takes. It took me 3 years, by the way, before I got my first game job out of school. So, it's normal. And the next point, this is just kind of an interesting point for me at least, is you're doing all this stuff, learning all this stuff in school, but in all honesty, the first year on the job, you may learn more than all this time, because as a student, it's kind of like your homework. You do it on the side a little bit. Most people aren't really treating it like their job, even though that's probably a good way to approach it if you just think of this as your job. But once you actually are doing it 8+ hours a day, every day, you'll see your skill and your just overall outlook on what the job needs and how you can fulfill that. You'll see that increase so much. And the next thing is, it's not just a 9-to-5 job for most of us. And I don't mean that in that you're going to be working overtime a lot necessarily, although depending on where you work, sometimes that's the case. I mean that more okay, you go to work, and then after work, it's still going to be on your mind. Unlike some other jobs, it's not something that you can just do while you're there and you go home and you party or you do something else. Art is not just a job for us. It's our hobby. It's almost like a lifestyle. You know what I mean? And so that also in it of itself is something that calls out a lot of people. Some people just want a 9-to-5 job. They don't want to be thinking about how to improve themselves. They don't want to learn a new program. or like keep working on your portfolio even after you've gotten your first job, which you should always be doing. And that's kind of what's going to separate a lot of people. And if you are willing to do that, then I think you will be one of the ones that will float to the top. And the last thing is the work is hard, but it can be rewarding as well. Like for example, the job I have on Overwatch right now, like it's the most rewarding job, but also the most difficult job I've ever had. And I don't mean that in like a technical execution sense. Like I feel like I've made a lot more detailed models in the past. I've made a lot more difficult in some other artistic way models in the past, but like Overwatch is just a very specific art style and a very stringent technical requirements that I was not used to at the time. But at the same time, it's like, it's Overwatch. And it's like, I've never even dreamt that I'd be a part of a game one day where like, I see people on the street like wearing the shirts and like, you know, seeing videos of it and cosplay of it. And you know, there's so much crazy stuff that is out there that is rewarding in another way. Survival tips. This is kind of like, you know, I guess like when you're in studios and kind of like things that will help you acclimate. The first thing is networking, and I put that in parentheses because I kind of hate this word. I hate the idea of like schmoozing or like people thinking that they can get a job just because they know someone. I mean, that's the case sometimes, but I say this more as like, what is your presence in the art community right now? And there are a lot of things that you can do right now to improve your networking in a very organic way, a very natural way. Like if you have an art station gallery, that's like already a step in the right direction. Do you post on forums? Do you give critiques to other artists? Are you in a club? Are you working on a mod? Are you even playing games? Like there's a lot of stuff that if you are doing these things just even passively, like you are already networking. And like when I get an applicant and I recognize that name and I've seen that person's work before, and I can even see their progress, like, oh yeah, I remember this guy used to really suck, but now he's really good, you know? And like, and I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, but like it's like I saw his development. Like just 1 year ago, he was like this, and this year he's like this. What would he be like next year, you know? And so when an employer, like, and I look at art tests, I give interviews, I do all this kind of stuff. So when someone like that comes across the table, I automatically feel like I've networked with this person before. Like it's better, almost like the better the devil you know than the devil you don't. So if I see someone out of the blue, I've never heard of this person before, and their work is just kind of mediocre, I have no context, I have no frame of reference for like what they were like in the past. I don't know anyone who even knows this person, like just even like from you know, another degree of separation. It becomes a little bit more difficult. And the next thing is a reputation. Treat each other well. The people you are sitting next to today may be your coworkers tomorrow or next year or whatever. It's a very small industry, even though it's growing. Like I always feel like if I don't know someone, I know the artist, I know someone who knows that person, usually. Like it's very small in that respect. So I can't tell you how many times I've come across like a portfolio and I ask my coworker like, hey, what's it like? I noticed you guys worked at the same studio. What was it like working with this guy? And sometimes it doesn't matter how good they are. If my coworker says, man, that guy was a real jerk, or he was just difficult to work with, or all these other things, and even I've had a time when I asked a coworker, it's like, oh, you guys went to school together. What was he like? And it's like, dude, if you hire that guy, I'm quitting. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, And it's unfair in a little bit, in a little way, because, you know, we all mature, we all change. That guy who he had problems with back in school, he probably matured. He might be fine now. But the fact that there is that, I know that, it makes it very difficult for me to overlook. So, you know, beware of what your reputation is. Be careful of what you say and how you say it, and be cool with each other, I guess is the, and online as well. Like, just don't hide behind anonymity and be a jerk. Because, you know, art handles, people remember those too. So, yeah. And once you start applying, the reality is that you'll have to do art tests, and art tests suck. Everyone hates doing it. It's like it's kind of a risky thing for the artist, because like you could potentially be spending a few weeks of your time, like unpaid, a lot of cases, to this test that you don't know is going to lead anywhere. But you know, that's just kind of the reality of it. There are a few reasons for doing this. One is obviously to test your art skills. Another reason might be you want to see if you are a good artist, but can you hit this particular style? Are you able to pick up on the subtleties that we need for our game or our production? This happens a lot in Overwatch, actually. Like, just when we give out an art test, like, we want to see like how you interpret a concept art, and like now that the game is out there, you see screenshots of it. Are you going to be able to put 2 and 2 together and translate that concept art into something that looks like it could appear in the game, instead of just kind of doing your own thing? Like, I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into, is like, art test, oh, I just need to show them how good I am, and like how much detail I can put in there and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, if you take that asset and you compare it to the game, if it doesn't look like it fits, you failed. It doesn't matter how good it is. Interviews. Interviews are also another super tricky thing. I personally don't really like interviews, because I feel like it's so easy to BS your way through all the times. But at the same time, that's something good for you to know, is how to talk to people. Like, for example, if I'm going to go into an interview with a certain company, to prepare myself, I need to research that company. I need to know what games they made. I need to hopefully play their games, just so that like when they ask me about it, I can say something productive. And I get an idea of what I'm walking into. Like, what is their company culture like? Is this even worthwhile for me to pursue? It's also tricky, because like they're gonna try to spit some trick questions at you to see if you fall into their checklist of requirements that are kind of unfair. But it's gonna be up to you to kind of guess at what that checklist is. You know, read their website, check with people who work there, who may have some tips for you, or things like that. It's a very difficult thing, because I feel like there are a lot of times when a worthwhile artist will get passed up because they did not do well on an interview. And I hate to see that happen. It sucks, because like I don't think interviews really do much. But that's just my personal opinion. The last thing is culture fit. And this kind of relates again with the interview, is knowing what the culture is at the particular studio that you're at, and seeing if you really fit in there. Like, just because it's a big name studio and they make games that you like, if you work there for a few years and you still feel like you don't fit in, you know, maybe it's not the right thing to stay there. Maybe that's not the right thing for you. It's funny, after working in the industry for a while and hearing experiences from other people at other studios, you really get a wide range of like what company culture could be like. There's some crazy stuff sometimes, and sometimes it's like super standard and corporate. But knowing what that is is going to help you a lot, because you really don't want to walk into a situation where you probably could have avoided it in the first place and just gone to a company that would have been a better fit for you. The next thing is, even once you get in, you have to earn it. This kind of goes back to keeping up to date with technology and software, and continuing to improve your art skills. It's very easy to once you get into a place and become comfortable, and to get lazy a little bit. I mean, not lazy, but just to, I don't know, not be as hungry, I guess, is one way to put it. And not only that, but like once you get married, once you have kids, like your time is gonna disappear, and it's important, especially in the early stages, once you get in your career, to really use whatever freedom that you have to try to solidify your direction and to build a good foundation for the rest of your career. And it goes to the next point, turning this into a career. If you look at the average career span for a lot of game artists, I think it was something like 5 years. I think that was the latest number I had heard. It's not very long, because the turnover rate can be very high. But then again, there are some people, especially like a place like Blizzard, who have been there for like 20 plus years. So it's just a matter of learning this thing right here, soft skills. I don't know if anyone has heard that term before. It basically refers to skills that are outside of, well, in this case, outside of art, basically. It's like your communication skills, it's your leadership skills, it's just how you interact with people, how do you handle different situations that come up. This becomes increasingly important as you get further into your career, because like, what is the difference between a junior artist and a senior artist? An easy definition of that is, well, the senior artist should be better at art. But that's not the only thing. I mean, you'll run into a lot of situations where like there's this like badass artist right out of school who's like showing up all the people at the studio. That happens occasionally. The thing is, that still doesn't make that person a senior artist, just because he may be as good or better. At a certain point, your art skill doesn't really matter anymore. Like once you pass the minimum threshold of appropriateness, or of whatever fits the needs of whatever project you're working on, like it really becomes more about like, what can you get done in other ways? Like how can you facilitate effort in a more efficient way, or like help other artists, or contribute to the company at a higher level than just whatever task you were given. These are the kinds of things that will separate a junior from a senior, and then from a senior to a lead, or things like that. That's not to say that everyone, I don't want people to think that that's like the only way to look at your career. Like not everyone wants to be a lead. Not everyone wants to be, to take on that kind of responsibility. Sometimes there's an artist who just really wants to get better at their craft, and that's cool too. At Blizzard, we kind of have two career paths. We have the principal artist route, and we have like the lead artist or management kind of route. So the principal artist is kind of like that person who just really wants to get better at they want to be the top of their field as far as like skill goes. And then there's the other route where it's like, hey, I've done enough art. I've gotten that out of my system a little bit. I really want to contribute to the project on a higher level. I want to like help more artists. I want to multiply my impact on the team by, instead of like just doing one model every month or whatever, I am helping 5+ artists do models every month. You know what I mean? It's a little bit different way of working at it. And I think at this stage in your career, you're probably thinking, oh, why would anyone want to do that? That sounds so boring. But you'll see. Once once you get into it a little bit longer, once you get older, your opinions may change. The next thing is big ships turn slow corporate structure. It's, once you're as a kid, or as a student, it's very easy to see this as a fun job, as just something that you always wanted to do for fun, and now you get paid for doing it, so that's awesome, right? But the reality is that it is a business. There is going to be some corporate structure to everything. Decisions are going to be made that are outside of what you feel is cool. Like, well, why don't we do this? Well, because that doesn't sell. Or, a lot of these kinds of things are going to happen, and it's important to keep that in mind just for the sake of not getting too disillusioned. I think that it's very easy to get into this trap especially when you kind of hit that wall at first, where you're like, this is my dream, and then like, why isn't anyone wanting to make it as cool as my dream? It's just realizing that what the limitations are and how to embrace it and how to help make it, shift in your direction as much as you can, if possible. That kind of goes back to, getting the crappy keyboard assignment and like turning it into something awesome on its own. Like, that's kind of what you have to get used to doing a little bit. And the last thing is, don't be negative. Be productive. Again, it's super easy to become jaded. I know so many jaded artists who worked in the industry who just get burned out. They had bad leaders. They had bad projects. They had canceled projects. After a while, that stuff starts to weigh down on you. You start to feel that this is not the industry that I wanted to be a part of. This is not what I thought it would be. It's very easy to get that impression, but I think one way to avoid that is to not be negative. Instead of going out every lunch to bitch about work with your coworkers, sometimes it's better like take a step back. It's like, hey guys, this is a problem. We recognize this is a problem. What can we do to make it at least a little bit better? And this is good life advice too. I used to be like the most negative person on earth, but so yeah, this will help you in many ways. Okay, in closing, thank you for coming out and spending some time with me. I hope some of this was useful. Yeah.
So we can open up some questions.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you kind of have a hive mind being like in the industry, just like homogenized, like idea set, and then putting out the same stuff. How do you go about adding more story into like the characters?
So the question was, how do you, with such a homogeneous group, like how do you go about adding story to characters, right? So I think that's something that most games fail at all the time. I think that it's one of those intangible things that separate a game like Overwatch and Blizzard versus like another game that is just kind of whatever. That's not to say that Overwatch is like the best or anything, but it's really about like what is the company's commitment to that, just as a philosophy. Like Blizzard's whole philosophy is we want to make characters that resonate with fans because that's exactly what we like to see. Unfortunately, that's not the case in a lot of other studios, and I think that the first step would be to try to get management or whoever is in charge to see the value in doing that, because like there is no direct correlation between like a good story, a character with a good story, how much money does that make? You know what I mean? Like, there's no way to really draw a line between those two. And there's going to be a lot of times when you can't do it. You know, like it's just going to be outside of your responsibility, outside of your power. But I mean, if that's something that you feel strongly about, and you are able to communicate with that to people who can make that decision, then that'll make you look good. You know, so it's just it's a tough thing because characters, especially in video games, like no one really expects great story in video games these days. I mean, it's kind of changing, but you know, until that becomes a reality to the point where customers really demand it, you know, you're always going to see crappy characters. So, any other questions? Yes.
Who's your favorite character in Overwatch?
My favorite character in Overwatch. I like Hanzo. Not just because I made him, but because like, he's kind of got an interesting, semi-tragic backstory, you know, with his brother and everything. And you know, I have a brother. I feel like, you know, that kind of. So, yeah. And also, interestingly enough, like Hanzo was one of my first normal human male characters I've made in the game industry. Like before that, it was always like a monster or like some mutated thing that, or some guy with like armor. He was like the first like, oh, this is the regular dude. You know, kind of thing. Yeah. I saw a hand in the back somewhere. Yeah.
What was your biggest fear in your interview?
In my interview, I think that's one of the things that you, almost like how you shouldn't approach it is having a fear because, well, first let me answer your question. I think the biggest fear is that you'll walk into an interview where the person on the other side is very stoic, very like, they're trying to play mind games with you or something. Like, I hate that. That's my biggest fear. Because then, like, you don't really know how to bounce stuff off of it. You don't have a good reactions to know what you're supposed to say, you know? But I think it's not good to go into an interview with fear. In most cases, in most interviews I've been in, if you think about it, the people who are interviewing you are your future peers, usually. These are, well, hopefully, like these are probably other artists, like maybe senior artists. These are people who kind of have the same history as you in some way or form. Chances are they're probably going to be cool to talk to. Like, you know, they're talking about stuff that you're interested in. They're asking you questions about like who your favorite character is. You know, what is your favorite game? What is, you know, how did you do this on your model? And these are things that you should be eager to talk about, right? You're just talking shop basically with like a fellow soul. So I think that's a better way of approaching it, is if you can go in there and make them feel like that you, like, hey, I am the guy that you're going to be working with. I'm the guy that you're going to be hiring. And you come across as that person that they want to work with in the future. Like, you're not like super nervous. You're not what? I've seen some artists who kind of do the reverse, where they're the ones who are very stoic and they're the ones who are very like rigid, and that's a huge turnoff for a lot of employers too. So yeah, just be cool. They're going to be cool, hopefully, and then things will work out. Yes.
So when it comes to an interview, like, should you just go to it knowing that you're probably qualified, like that's why you got the interview, but the interviewer is just trying to find a reason to not hire you?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. Chances are, if they are interviewing you, then yes, they probably think you are good enough. That's like, that almost goes without saying, especially if they flew you in for an on-site interview. That's when you know that this is serious, right? Like if it's a phone screen, that's still like, there's no money involved. That, you know, that could be whatever. But but yes, they will still try to weed you out to some extent. Like you may run into a situation where there's a good cop, bad cop situation. There's one hard ass guy who's like asking all these almost borderline offensive questions about like your ability, and then there's another person who's like trying to mediate a little bit. And sometimes that's just like trying to see like how you react to certain situations. How professional are you? Are you going to break down and cry? Are you going to stand up and leave? Are you going to insult them? If you just think of it in that context, like these people probably aren't, hopefully they're not real jerks, like they're just trying to test you a little bit. They may ask you really weird questions, like one question I got one time was, okay, what if I gave you, like how long would it take you to make a model? And then I say, okay, well, given these specifications, this is how much I estimate. It's like, okay, well, what if I told you you had half the time? What would you do? And then like, okay, well, what if I told you you had to make 5 models in that time? What would you do? You know, and like especially as like a student, that becomes a very difficult question to answer because like you're thinking, you're in the mindset that like, hey, I'm gonna work harder. I'm gonna try to reuse some stuff from other models and try to make it faster. I'm gonna work later. I'm gonna do all this stuff. I'm gonna do whatever it takes to like make this work. But that's usually not the answer that they want to hear. They want to hear you push back all the times. It's like, do you have the awareness of not just of like what the project that you were given, but also the needs of the project as a whole? Like, it's like, wait a minute, who's asking for 5 models in a month? Why do we need 10 different models for this situation? You know, like, they're probably testing you in other ways. Like if you just take a moment to think about like, why are they asking me this? Like, there's probably a frame of reference that they're looking to see if you can identify with. That's, yeah. Yes?
I remember earlier in your presentation you said something along the lines of like, it doesn't really matter if like you're a great artist amongst your peers and like they love it, but if your art doesn't really fit with or mesh within the standard of the industry, then it doesn't matter. But I'm curious as to like your opinion or your perspective on artists that are out there that are sort of like outliers as far as like style goes, who do get hired for work for studios like Theo Prince. And
Oh yeah.
Art, you know?
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with him. He's a super cool guy. So that's kind of a unique situation. Like ArenaNet in general. Is he still at ArenaNet? I think he is. So like, I worked at ArenaNet. That was my first game job, and the thing that was unique about them was that they were very art first focused, which is like almost contrary to most other studios. Like their art director Daniel, well, he's not there anymore, but Daniel Dochu, he's super fine arts background kind of guy. And he had like a whole lot of respect, and his kind of philosophy was that, hey, if we take this art that is super cool in an abstract way, like even if like 10% of that works its way into the game, then it's a success. And you'll see that happen a lot in like movies, for example. Like you kind of get like this person, and you look at the production sketches or whatever, like that looks nothing like the final movie. But it's more like fielding ideas and inspiration at that point, which is perfect for a concept artist, not so much for a 3D artist. But yeah, I think that's kind of where it comes from. The thing about that though is that you still have to be that good. Like Theo Prince is awesome artist, right? And like, as long as you're not in a situation where you're just different for the sake of being different, you know what I mean? Then I think it's okay, or can be okay in some situations.
So it depends a lot on like who's sort of like who has the most say in like the kind of eye,
Yeah.
the kind of feel that they want
Right.
with the project.
Right,
Okay.
right. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on like, you know, where you want to be. But yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
If you are having a problem with the where do you want to be question,
Yeah.
like you need a resource or you need to like kind of open yourself up to different, parts of like these companies and places, what would you suggest we do as far as like research or going out there and involving ourselves?
When you say where do you want to be, do you mean actually a place you want to be, or do you want to be like the job that you want to do? What you want to do?
Yeah.
I think that, again, now as a student, this is the perfect time to be exploring those kinds of things. I think, and I forgot to mention this before, I'm glad you asked this, but as a student, I remember a lot of my peers were frustrated when like, oh, I have to take this texturing class. I hate texturing. Like, I'm not going to be a texture artist. Or like, I hate animation. Why are they making me do animation? Like, that's so useless. I'm wasting my time. But like at the end of the day, like all of these things really help you. Like it helps, especially for a person who doesn't know what they want to do yet. Like getting a little bit of everything, which is probably this kind of environment is the only way you're going to get that like disciplined exposure to. Because on your own, you would never do something you don't like, right?
I gotta give you a hug right now for saying that.
But like, it's when you experiment with all these things, eventually you're going to find something that, okay, well, this is actually interesting to me. I think where that usually comes to light is in the field of tech art. Like, does anyone know what tech art is? Or I haven't ever heard of it, that kind of job? Yeah, sort of. At least in games, it's a little bit different than the technical director in films. That title is a little bit different in movies, but in games, like the technical art, basically you're in charge of mostly what happens between modeling and animation. So you're doing the rigging, you're doing the scripting, you're doing the like physics setup, all these things that like in school you don't have a whole lot of exposure to because it's not like one of those super sexy, like, oh, look at my animation reel. Oh, look at my model. It's a little bit more on the nuts and bolts end of things. And like some people, when they dig into it, like, oh, this is super cool. Like, I don't need to be like the best artist, like in practice, but like the fact that I have art knowledge and I have this technical background, I can excel in this other way. And I think just being able to experiment with as many things as you can is I don't have a good way to do it, but that's just, yes.
So you said you had a dark time after school, that you were working on your portfolio. What, for you personally, what kept you going, kind of like when you have no more gas when it all seems to?
I think for me, it's just like, I really don't want to be working in military sim forever, like it's, and there's nothing wrong with military sim if you're into it, like, but for me, it's like, that's not what I envisioned in school as being my job, and like, just like philosophically, I don't want to be making like weapons of destruction, you know what I mean? So I think that at that time, just knowing what I had, having a clear idea of where I wanted to be, like really helped me, So.
Do you have any tips for students to not get comfortable?
To not get comfortable. Yeah, I think you mean while you're in school or like after school?
When you're in school, like you say you sort of master one style.
Yeah.
That for you not to just stay stagnant.
Oh,
in
yeah,
that style.
yeah, yeah.
And also when you have a job, just to not stay stagnant too. Just to not get stuck.
Yeah. I guess the first thing would be, as a student, you probably haven't mastered anything. Like, and that's just being perfectly honest. Like the chances of someone who's in their 20s, which I assume most of you are around that age, like mastering something, like even like someone who's well into the careers in their 50s and 60s, no one really masters anything, just more than other people a little bit. I think that's the first step in being humble and recognizing that there's always room to grow. And then like just being able to look out to see what else is out there, and to fairly and objectively compare yourself again, like just to say like, I think I mastered it, and then you look at someone else who's like maybe better, like, did I really master that? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like, there's always someone who's going to be better than you. So I don't know. I think when it comes down to like motivation and inspiration and stuff like that, that's going to be a lot on how you approach things up to this point. I think if you have had this drive up to this point, you'll probably be able to maintain it even as you're working in the industry, as long as like you don't run into a situation where like, oh, I have like 10 kids, I don't have time to work anymore, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
What are the artists' relationships with like the technical software people? Like, do they collaborate a lot, or are they kind of cliquey?
It depends on the studio. Like, at all my other studios that I worked at, it was, I wouldn't say cliquey, but it was very closed off. Like, it was very compartmentalized. Like, and it was a problem where it almost became like us versus them. Like, well, we need this. These are our resources, but this other group is like taking our polygon budget. Like the environment team, you know, or like the animations. Oh, why are they doing this? They're making us redo all this work. And it's very easy when the company culture is set up like that to have a lot of infighting and have a lot of disagreements and a lot of bad blood between groups. Blizzard, and I don't want to feel like, oh, Blizzard is awesome, but Blizzard was the first place where like I feel like we don't have as many of those kinds of walls. I'm sure some people still feel it, but it's actually very open for us. Like, we highly encourage people to get up and talk to other groups to get things. That's the only way you can really get things done sometimes. Like, your lead you can't expect your lead to tell you to go talk to someone. Like, that's just like not, you can't be expected to, you can't expect anyone else to micromanage you to tell you how to get some stuff done sometimes. Like, sometimes you have to take it upon yourself to like, well, I know who's responsible for this part of the game. Why don't I just go over and talk to him? You know, and I wish I had that experience earlier, because like in my previous job, sometimes I thought that was just the way it was. Like, you don't talk to programmers because they're smarter than you and they're going to get mad at you or whatever, you know. But once you actually go talk to someone, you'll be surprised, like the fact that you're interested in what they're doing and vice versa. Like, that opens up a lot of doors, and that's kind of one of the paths to becoming in this case specifically, becoming a game developer first and an artist second. And that's kind of like what Blizzard's mantra is, almost like we are game developers first, all of us, before we are our discipline next. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on the art test that you're talking about, and you take one from Blizzard, and you talked about how you don't get paid for several weeks? Can you elaborate on that as well?
Sure. Actually, Blizzard was the first job where I didn't have to do art tests, which is super rare though. Like, most of the time you have to do an art test. As far as like the several weeks goes, like it just depends on what the art test is. Sometimes it's a very small test, which maybe you can do in a few days. But honestly, like the way most games are these days, like it takes a long time to make a character. You know, it takes a long time to fully flesh out something to the point where you can show someone and that person can analyze it and see that you've checked all the boxes as far as like how well it was done. Is it like, did you bake your maps correctly? You know, are there any technical flaws or errors? Did you meet the specifications that they mentioned in the guidelines? You know, how closely were you following directions? Like, did you read that part where it says like, name all your name all your objects in your scene, or you know what I mean? Like if you don't do that and they look at it and they can, you're just giving them ammunition to not hire you. So that's kind of where it is. So it takes a long time to create an art test, but and that's what I mean that why it's risky is because you could potentially be dedicating a few weeks of your time for something that may or may not happen. Like even if you do really well on an art test and it's perfect, the end result is perfect, you can still go into an interview and bomb it, and you're still out a few weeks of potential pay or free time or whatever you want to call it. But I don't know, that's just the reality of it though. I don't have any way to finagle yourself out of taking an art test if they want it. Yeah.
What are your characters making Overwatch?
What other characters?
Yeah, you're making Overwatch.
I made Hanzo, Pharah, Reaper, McCree, Diva the pilot, and something else. I don't remember all right off the top of my head. And I made a bunch of skins too. But yeah, but these days, like, I don't really do too much direct assets anymore. Like I mentioned before, like I'm more on the outsourcing side where I still do a lot of art though. Like I still work on their models directly to make sure that they're hitting the style and like doing things correctly. And all the final polish goes through me usually, and my partner. So, you know, it's not like I don't do art anymore, but like it's a very different way of doing art. Like I think if I were to ask myself and when I was your ages, like would I enjoy this kind of job? Like I probably would have said no. It's like this. Like I can't put my name on anything. I can't put anything in my portfolio anymore. You know, I can't say that I made this skin or whatever anymore. And for a lot of people, that's a huge turnoff. But for me, at this stage in my career, you know, like I don't need to make another model. Like I'm pretty sure whatever they gave me, I can do a decent job at it. Like I don't need to prove myself to anyone anymore, and I don't need the feeling of that personal satisfaction of being able to show your work anymore. Like I'm kind of like past. I'm not past it, but like it doesn't really excite me anymore, you know. So these days it's more like I get more gratification from like seeing other people succeed. The fact that I'm helping like create a lot more work in a shorter period of time, like it makes me feel like a more important part of the company, things like that. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
I think Ashley,
Oh, hi.
Kind of going back to like speaking with other parts of the development team.
Yeah.
You guys, like with the other games, like with WoW or Diablo or StarCraft, do you guys intermingle at all and kind of talk about, you know, like, oh hey, you know, I saw you did this, it looks pretty nice, or maybe give feedback what they did?
Yeah. It really depends. Each team is almost like it's almost like its own company. Like we all get our own budgets. We all sit in a different place from all the other teams. But at the same time, we have visibility on what everyone else is doing to a certain extent. And for example, there's a lot of cross promotion that happens. Like right now, it's like, oh, play Heroes of the Storm, and you can get this skin in Overwatch, you know, that kind of thing. So like when that happens, we do get a lot of communication because at that point we have an interest in their IP all of a sudden because like we want them to represent our IP as faithfully as possible and vice versa if that happens, you know. And that's kind of a tricky thing sometimes because we're all passionate artists. We all have our own vision of what we want it to be, and then as soon as it's like, this is my project, and then like, who are you to say like, that's very rarely happens, but there's always that potential, that danger. But yeah, we try to have as much communication as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? You guys good? Well, that was amazing. That was such a great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.